Okay, well, it's 12 noon. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Welcome to our nonprofit bistro session. My name is Kelly, and joining me at today's session is my colleague Shanaz. We are with the Community Development Unit of Alberta Culture and Status of Women. Our guest speaker today is Mr. Martin Kratz, and I will introduce him in just a few moments. The goal of all of our webinars is for nonprofit board members to have the knowledge, skills, and tools to be successful in their work. On the screen, you can see the other governance-related webinars that we offer. You can see the details of all the sessions and register for them through the link in the chat box it's albertacdu.eventbrite.com. Please invite your friends, colleagues, and others in your community to check out our Eventbrite page as well. And you'll notice here on the screen that we have our cybersecurity, What's the Board's Role webinar scheduled for February 15th from 1:30 to 3:30 p.m. And Shanaz is going to put the links into the chat box now. Okay. So here's a list of our nonprofit bistro webinars for this winter 2022 season. The webinars that are in boldface on the list are currently open for registration. We do record all of our nonprofit bistro series webinars, so please go to our CDU YouTube channel to find the recordings and be sure to subscribe to be notified of the new recordings as they come available. Right now, I'd like to take a moment to recognize that we are on the traditional and ancestral homeland of many diverse peoples of Alberta, the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, whose ancestors have walked and stewarded this land since time immemorial. We recognize our role as settlers on this land, and we're grateful to work, live, and learn on this traditional territory. We are located all across Alberta and acknowledge the land of many peoples presently associated with Treaties 6, 7, and 8. This includes the Métis settlements and the 6 regions of the Métis Nation of Alberta. We make this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation and gratitude. As I mentioned before, we are with the Community Development Unit of Alberta Culture and Status of Women. Our unit provides support for nonprofit and community organizations, as well as public sector organizations in Alberta on a wide variety of topics. If you need more information about our services, please visit our website, give us a call, or send us an email. And Shanaz is going to just put our contact information into the chat box now. There it is. Okay, we're also using automatic live captions for this session. And if you'd like to enable it, please hover your mouse over the bottom of the Zoom screen and click on the closed caption button and click on show subtitle. If you're connected by a smartphone or an iPad, to access the captions, please tap on more and then tap on view full transcript. Feel free to put in your comments, observations, and questions in the chat box. Please do keep in mind that this is a public chat box intended for attaining your feedback, presenting information, teaching, and learning related to the topic today. So please provide your thoughts and comments with that consideration in mind. Now, while Martin is presenting, Shanaz and I will be looking for any questions that show up in the chat box, and we'll collect them so that we can make sure they're that Martin sees them at the end of the presentation so he can respond to them at that time. We have a toolkit with some helpful resources and the slides from today's session that we will share with you. And the link to the resources is going into the chat box now as well. And it's there. The other thing I would like to mention is that the information presented today and the related materials are not intended to constitute legal or professional advice, the rendering of legal concepts, consulting, or other professional services of any kind. We simply want to share with you information that we think will be helpful as you navigate your organization through its operations. And on that note, for your organization's specific situations and questions, you may need to seek the advice from a professional in the related area. Also would like to mention that the views and opinions expressed in this webinar are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Government of Alberta. On behalf of the Community Development Unit, I am pleased to introduce our 6th nonprofit bistro session, Responding to a Ransomware Attack. Ransom attacks are increasing dramatically and target both for-profit and nonprofit organizations in Alberta. This presentation introduces some of the vulnerabilities that can make an attack on your organization more likely. It explores 2 actual attacks and illustrates what you may expect in this type of situation. Ransoms are often demanded in Bitcoin, so this element and its risks are explored. Techniques for recovering a ransom payment are introduced. The session ends with a summary of good practices to minimize your organization's vulnerability to these attacks. To help us navigate this topic, we are very pleased to have with us today Mr. Martin Kratz. Martin Kratz is an author, professor, and former senior technology and intellectual property lawyer who led the intellectual property and technology practices for Bennett Jones LLP. Martin's practice was focused around intellectual property and technology law, including data protection, privacy, cybersecurity, IP transactions, technology transfers, and e-commerce matters. Martin has taught information technology law and ethics, a master's level cybersecurity course in the Faculty of Management at Concordia University of Edmonton. Martin has written 19 books, 40 book chapters, and over 450 articles on various topics involving IP, technology law, and cybersecurity. And last but not least, Martin is also the current board chair of the Parkinson's Association of Alberta, so he is quite familiar with the nonprofit sector. So thank you, Martin, for joining us today. Over to you.
Thank you, Kelly. I'll start the presentation now.
Yes, and if you'd like to share your screen, Martin, that would be great.
So again, any presentation from a lawyer has to have some fine print. So this is our fine print. We're going to deal with a number of complex topics, and what you should do is, if you have questions about your own situation as a not-for-profit organization, you should consult with your lawyer about your situation. Today, we're going to talk about the fact that we have many sources of data. We're going to explore 2 ransom attacks, one a hack and one an automated attack. We're going to look at payment considerations and whether you should make that decision and the pros and cons of that decision. We're going to explore Bitcoin a little bit. We're going to see how, if you respond quickly, you may be able to get some funds back. And then we're going to look at how you can reduce your risk. We'll have questions available at the end. So we live in a world that's highly interconnected, and where we consume and we produce large amounts of data, and organizations collect, use, and secure many types of that data: operational records, financial data, including financial records of customers and donors, of benefit and other financial data of your employees and volunteers, marketing records, including on past and current customers and donors, information on disputes. You use this information for strategic and for operational purposes: your business plans, information on donation prospects, information on confidential transactions such as grants or financings. And a lot of this information can be very valuable. Your information is going to be stored in a variety of locations: accounting systems and databases, document management systems, marketing databases. You'll have files on local computers, and you'll have files on mobile devices. For operational reasons, we need access to that data, and most organizations restrict access to its data on a need-to-know basis and seek to provide security for that data But staff need to get access so they can do the work, and that may be by email. They may be able to move files as attachments, and they may be able to directly log into your systems remotely. And data is also stored and moved on portable devices such as USB drives, laptop computers, and mobile devices. That valuable data may be vulnerable. There are many points of access, and that data or your systems can become a target for ransom attacks. Here's a statement from Robert Mueller, who was director of the FBI in 2012. He said there are only two types of companies, those that have been hacked and those that will be. So we'll look now at some Alberta incidents. In Alberta, there's a private sector privacy law that obligates organizations to report to the privacy commissioner if there's been an impact on the data that they are storing of an individual that may cause harm to that individual. And if you look through this list, you'll see that these are all cases reported to the Alberta Privacy Commissioner. They all involved Alberta residents. Where there's a star, the hack, these are all ransom attacks. The ransom attack occurred where there's a star on a service provider, and where there is a plus sign, those are cases where we know that a ransom was paid. I didn't list all the high-profile ransom attacks like Colonial Pipelines or older attacks like that on the University of Calgary. I listed only ransom attacks on not-for-profits or educational institutions that affected Albertans. These are all in the last 12 months, and I specifically did not list any Alberta nonprofits, of which there were many. And note how often it's known that ransoms were paid, and note the need to manage service provider risk. For many not-for-profit organizations, your IT function is often outsourced to a service provider, so you need to know that service provider is taking the appropriate precautions on your behalf. So why so many nonprofits? The Personal Information Protection Act states that it doesn't apply to nonprofit organizations or personal information that is in the custody or under the control of a nonprofit organization, except in the case of personal information that is collected, used, or disclosed in connection with any commercial activity. And nonprofit organizations is defined to mean an organization incorporated under the Societies Act or the Agricultural Societies Act, or registered under Part 9 of the Companies Act. So this exclusion of the Personal Information Protection Act doesn't apply if you're incorporated federally or under a different statute. It also doesn't apply to any not-for-profit that's carrying out any commercial activity. For example, if you offer a service at a cost, such as a daycare, a fitness center, training, meal delivery. The Provincial Act also applies to private colleges, private schools, early childhood education services. It also applies if you sell, barter, or lease a membership list, donor list, fundraising list, client or volunteer or employee list. So you should check with your legal counsel as to the status of your organization. And even if the obligation to report a breach doesn't arise for your organization, notification, even without a legal obligation, is a prudent risk mitigation activity. So let's focus on ransom attacks. A ransom attack is an attack that makes ransom demand. And the attack mechanism may start off by taking advantage of what we call an exploit. An exploit is a vulnerability that would allow an adversary to get access to and control of your computer. Ransomware is software. It's basically a type of malware. We call it malware, meaning that it's designed with evil intent. It may encrypt files on a device, rendering those files and the systems that rely on them unusable. As an example, in the case of the WannaCry attack, hackers used a cyber warfare weapon developed by the National Security Agency. It was stolen and leaked by the shadow brokers. That attack infected over 200,000 computers around the world, taking down crucial services and mechanisms managed by the National Health Service in the UK. It stopped when a UK computer security researcher discovered and activated a kill switch that was built into the code. This business is becoming much more sophisticated. You can now buy retail ransomware engines for purchase on the dark web. You can also hire other criminal organizations to provide the attack for you. They're lucrative and they continue to grow strongly, and they're obviously conducted by criminals. We're going to look at a couple of these attacks as examples. These attacks are big business. They're often commenced by introducing malicious software that infiltrates your computer system or network. The software allows access so that the criminal uses tools like encryption to deny access or hold data hostage until you pay a ransom. Often they demand payment in Bitcoin. There are many other ransom strategies. A couple of examples are they may threaten to disclose private information unless a ransom is paid, or they may threaten a distributed denial of service attack unless a ransom is paid. That's where they get together a number of hundreds or thousands of computers all to ping your website and thereby shut you down. In 2021, many have observed markedly higher ransom demands from attackers, a shift from opportunistic attacks to targeted attacks, and an increase in organized cyber criminal syndicates leveraging theft of sensitive information to extort high ransoms from victims, and that even in cases where there are backups available. So how does the attacker get in? You don't have to be sophisticated to run these attacks. At present, it's estimated about 6 in 10 of the malware payloads are ransomware. So the infecting software is often delivered through various means. It could be an email phishing campaign to gather credentials. Phishing is a term that means it's a fake message, such as, for example, where your bank or a message that purports to be from your bank says that your account has been frozen and they want you to click on a link so that purportedly you can give them account details so that they can unlock the account. No bank will ever do that. So those are phishing attacks. They're trying to gather credentials, or they're seeking to have you click on an executable file which deposits the ransomware software on your computer. There are also mal-advertising campaigns where the code is hidden in an online ad. There may be vulnerabilities in your software and your patches are not up to date. That's one of the simplest things you can do, is always make sure your security patches are put up to date and installed as soon as they're available. Or a user could visit a malicious website where loading the site causes the ransomware code to load while the site is loading. And obviously the direct payment from the attack is what's motivating the criminals. There are 5 stages in these attacks. The first is the infection stage, where the ransomware installs itself on the device and on any network devices that it can access. The ransomware then contacts the server operated by the criminals to generate cryptographic keys that will be used on the local system. The ransomware starts encrypting any files it can find both on the local device and on the network. And when the encryption work is done, the ransomware displays instructions to extort a ransom payment and threatens destruction of the data or publication of the data or many other things that you don't want to have happen. Your options are, you can pay the ransom and hope to get the code to decrypt the affected files, or you can attempt to recover your systems by removing the infected files and systems from the network and restoring data from clean backups. So a first example is a hack. This is an attack in Alberta by a Russian mafia. So in bold is their actual demand, and I've reduced the information so that you can not identify the victim. So they say, pay careful attention to what we have to say. This is not a negotiation, it is a demand. We have, and they show then or describe what they have and provide you examples of the data that's been breached so that you can verify they've been in part of your system where they shouldn't be. You may be tempted to engage authorities, don't. They cannot help, and involving them makes more public what is private. Then they give you a choice. Pay us a certain number of Bitcoins within the next 72 hours. Historically, the amounts that were demanded were very modest compared to the alternative costs, but they've gone up very quickly over the last 2 or 3 years. And the short time frame is a key part of the strategy. They want to keep you off balance. And the option is data will be permanently deleted and none released to third parties or the web. So that's part of the business model for them, but can you trust them? Or don't and suffer fallout from the data dump on the web of what we have. And in this case, it would be client, employees, donors, and volunteer personal information, credit card information, proprietary information and financials, as well as operational and internal communications that are confidential. Let's look at an automated ransom attack. This is where a attacking software looks through the web to find your computer. And this is an example of an automated attack where your computer was infected by WannaCry. The malware exploited an inadvertently open port that meant that the computer had live internet access, and Microsoft had identified that vulnerability. They'd released patches. This attack occurred 2 months after those patches were released. So if you had not patched this problem, you were vulnerable and could well have been encrypted by this software. The malware searched the internet for computers that had not patched the vulnerability. Once they located those computers, they took control of the computers and encrypted the files. So they provide information on Bitcoin because many people don't know what Bitcoin is. In this case, you can see it was only a ransom demand of $300. And there's the Bitcoin address that you have to send to. And they have information on how to buy Bitcoin. And again, a key part of the strategy is a countdown clock. They're putting time pressure on the victim. So do you pay? What do you do in this awful situation that you find yourself in? The decision environment is very demanding if you are suffering a ransom attack. The clock is ticking. The decision makers have very little time and little information in which to make very difficult decisions. There are many distractions. Your organization may well be out of business for a while, and it's not always clear that the organization can recover its systems and its data. So on the payment choice, do you refuse to pay? Pros for refusing to pay is that you stand on principle. You don't pay ransom. That's the end of the story. You hope for some sympathy as a victim of a crime. Maybe some stakeholders will go easier on you. You do save the money, the ransom, and it makes you less of a future target if they know you don't pay. And that certainly is true. Cons are the data is actually breached. The toothpaste is out of the tube and you're not getting it back in. Privacy has been breached and there's potential further compromise that awaits. Real lawsuits are likely against the organization and possibly against the board of directors. Class action lawyers are certainly willing to sue, and they sue any organization where they think they can recover a settlement. You may have, depending on the nature of the organization, regulatory compliance obligations. As you said, some not-for-profits may have to report to the privacy commissioner, or there may be other regulatory organizations that you have to report to. So principal can cost a lot, and can you actually recover from unconnected, uncompromised backups? The FBI has some advice on paying ransoms. They don't support paying a ransom to the criminals because it doesn't guarantee that you'll regain access to the data. Some organizations are never provided with decryption keys after paying a ransom. And paying the ransom emboldens the adversary to keep in this business. And so it's an incentive for others to engage in the ransom business. But importantly, although the FBI does not support paying ransom, it recognizes that executives, when faced with inoperability issues, will evaluate all options to protect their clients, employees, and members. And if you're interested in more details, the FBI public service announcement, ransomware victims urged to report infections to federal law enforcement, is helpful. In either case, what you have to do is once the issue is identified, you have to assess the vulnerability and resolve it. You have to isolate the infected system and remove it from the network. You have to recover from unaffected backup files. You have to fortify the system, so you need better IT and better education of your people. You should be monitoring ongoing what's happening in your system. If necessary, report to applicable regulatory authorities. Check your insurance coverage. Are the costs of recovering something that's covered under your insurance? And what you should always be thinking about is external forensic examination of your system to check for planted code, because often a ransom attack is a front to cover other malware inserted into the system. So they may be other code that gives a backdoor to the criminals to just monitor what's going on in your system, see if something valuable comes along and attack you again or take it. On responding to the attack, the FBI recommends organizations isolate the infected computer immediately, remove infected systems from the network as soon as you can to prevent the ransomware from attacking network or shared drives, isolate or power off affected devices, immediately secure your backup data or systems, take them offline and ensure they're free of malware. They want you to contact law enforcement. We'll talk about that in a moment. They'd like you to secure partial portions of the ransom data if available for you. They also recommend that you change all online account passwords and network passwords after you remove the system from the network, and change all system passwords once the malware is removed from the system. Stop the malware program from loading, implement security incident response and business continuity plans, which are good for every organization to have. And then when the dust is settled, conduct a post-incident review of the response. How did the response work? What did you do well? What didn't you do well? What are the learnings to make you better prepared for the next time? So let's look at the world of Bitcoin. Today, the trading rate was one Bitcoin is a little over 49,000 Canadian dollars. This is an unregulated world. There's no universal court where you can litigate if you're wronged. You have to pay with real currency, and it's purchased through non-mainstream channels. And depending on how much Bitcoin are needed, you may need several vendors, and you may have to buy in installments. And remember, the clock is ticking. So there's some characteristics of the Bitcoin world. It's anonymized. That is, there's no known link from an individual to a Bitcoin address. You can't look up the yellow pages or white pages. But it isn't anonymous. There is a link of the Bitcoin address to every payment, and the blockchain is public and provides a public record of every transaction. So these are the payments made in the WannaCry attack. There were three addresses, Bitcoin addresses provided, A, B, and C. And you see in every case, they split the payment that they received into two almost equal amounts, and then what looks like a referral fee or a small fee goes to a further address. And then as the international police and the FBI were ramping up the pressure to look for these criminals, the accounts then started to launder some of the money. So they got some money out, and they moved all the funds into a final account. And it seems at that point, whoever was receiving what looks like a referral fee or a finder's fee put their funds into the final account as well. So you can track these payments. The funds go in to acquire Bitcoin by money order, wire, or certified check. An account is set up and a wallet is opened, and a paid agent can do that for you. You get a barcode and key. The steps of making the payment are: you confirm the payment, you send to the wallet ID, you watch the real-time transfer proceeding, and transaction fee is paid, and then the transfer is complete, and you may or may not get a confirmation message to follow from the criminals. There's some risks in dealing with Bitcoin. Those include the counterparty may actually fail to deliver the Bitcoins at all or by the required time, and the time is ticking against you. Completing the transaction may cause victim, or a counterparty, or both, to fail to comply with administrative or regulatory obligations. FINTRAC is a regulatory obligation, for example, that requires every transaction over $10,000 to be reported, and that's part of our anti-money laundering regulatory regime. There's a risk that the Bitcoins may be fake, and you won't know that at the time of the handoff. And there's a risk that whatever the criminals were going to do or not do, they may not carry out, and they may disclose sensitive information or may not give you the code to decrypt your files. So now I have a question for you. Your organization has just been the subject of a ransom attack. The executive director calls you and says, do we pay? What's your advice? Would you pay the ransom or not? So a real world survey on payment of 125 anonymous Canadian companies reported, of those, 44 of the companies had reported a ransom attack on their organization in the previous 12 months. 33 or 75% had paid ransoms, and the costs ranged from $1,000 to $50,000. 25% were targeted with the attacks. They didn't pay, and they had to shut down their business for a while to deal with the attack and devote resources to recover. So, can you respond quickly? You can get your money back if you act quickly. So this is a lawsuit, a case in England where AA is an anonymous insurance company. It's made anonymous in the court decision by the authority of the court so that the criminals can't go after the insurance company. And in this case, a Canadian insurance company was hacked. The insurance company is the insured. The hacker bypassed the firewall and installed an application to encrypt the company's computer system. And the hacker sent a ransom demand. And again, this is the actual demand. Your network was hacked and encrypted. No free decryption software is available on the web. Email us to get the ransom amount. Keep our contacts safe. Disclosure can lead to impossibility of decryption. Please use your company name as the email subject. And again, as I said, the victim company was insured by AA for cyber crimes. Once they were notified, the insurance company instructed an incident response company to negotiate the provision of the decryption software, which would allow the customer to reaccess its data and systems. The criminals initially demanded $1.2 million in Bitcoin. That was negotiated down to $950,000 US. At the time, a little over 109 Bitcoin. The insurance company engaged a payment service who sent the Bitcoin to the criminal's address. Once they were paid, the criminals sent the decryption tool. It took the insured customer 5 days to decrypt 20 servers and 10 days to decrypt 1,000 desktop computers. The insurance company continued to investigate. They tracked the Bitcoin. Some Bitcoin had been converted to cash, but 96 Bitcoin were linked to a Bitcoin exchange. And many Bitcoin exchanges are subject to know your client rules, which is an anti-money laundering requirement. On identifying the exchange, the insurance company went promptly to court and sought a proprietary injunction. That's an injunction seeking a declaration that the Bitcoin is the property of the insurance company. Their claim was that the $950,000 of Bitcoin are held by the exchange as a constructive trust for the insurance company. That means it has trust obligations that would be owed to the insurance company, and a restitution order was sought. In other words, that the insurance company can get control of the funds. The court granted the injunction. They gave a freezing order, which is an order preventing the exchange from transferring the Bitcoin. And they also had provided an order providing information so that the location of assets and where the monies have moved could be obtained. So while cyber currencies are very easy to move, they are traceable using the blockchain. And this unique public nature of Bitcoin transactions makes the involvement of advisors with specialized expertise at an early stage very important. So if you can move very fast, you could consider to seek a worldwide freezing order. We call that a Mariva injunction. That's the case name after which this type of order was created. And that prevents further transfers of the funds. A Norwich Pharmacal order, that's again the case name, that is an order that requires the exchange or the bank to disclose the account holder's identity. And then an injunction, in this case, part of the law will impose a trust obligation on the fraudulent recipient, and the property can be recovered and traceable by law. So in the Colonial Pipeline ransom attack that was popularized in the media about a year ago, they paid $4.4 million in Bitcoin ransom. But acting very quickly, the US Department of Justice seized about 2.3 million of the Bitcoin that had been paid to the criminal hacking group DarkSide. That was the first seizure undertaken by a new Department of Justice Digital Extortion Task Force. This problem is getting worse. The number of attacks is increasing rapidly. Increasingly, the attackers also exfiltrate sensitive data. That means they take copies of the data. They don't just lock it up. They take the data so they can study it or sell it on the dark web. And the amounts of the ransom demands are increasing quickly. Local law enforcement usually are not well trained to address these kinds of attacks. But local law enforcement can be an important link to connect you to sophisticated law enforcement, such as CSIS, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, or Homeland Security in the United States. Often those organizations are monitoring many different attacks, and so they may be able to identify who the attacker is, the attacker group, and give you important information on how the situation for other victims turned out. So what can you do to reduce the risk? Start by training your staff not to click on unwanted or unexpected links and spam messages or unverified links on websites. And don't share personal information when answering an email, unsolicited phone call, text message, or instant message. Keep all systems and software up to date with relevant patches as promptly as possible. Understand your data and take steps to safeguard sensitive or valuable data. And then scan your messages for malware with reputable software. Use firewalls. While it's irritating, multi-factor authentication is very useful to reduce the risk. And that multi-factor authentication means that you typically sign into your account and then a message is sent to your smart device and with an additional code to verify that you actually have physical control of that device. It's important to prepare and practice an incident response plan. And you can do what's called a tabletop exercise, which is when you're not under the stress of an actual attack, you can plan to see how you would respond. And that can really help you if you're in the unenviable position of being attacked. You should only download from trusted websites, and you should talk to your insurance broker about getting adequate cyber insurance coverage. You should keep backups of important data frequently and store them separately, and then test the backups frequently to make sure they're okay. And if you're using public Wi-Fi, you should use a virtual private network or VPN. Don't use unfamiliar USB devices because they can load malware into your system, and you should avoid sharing your personal information. Organizations can reduce their risk by getting help with the training and implementing the policies and practices to reduce the risks of ransomware and other attacks. And often you get that assistance from computer security professionals. Thanks, I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, well, that was a very, very interesting and valuable presentation, Martin. Thank you very much for that and for sharing your knowledge and experience dealing with ransomware attacks and taking the time to be with us today. You've certainly given us a lot of information and things to think about as nonprofits. because as you said in your presentation, being a nonprofit is not protection from ransomware attacks, because for one thing, there are these automated attacks, as you said. Martin, in the chat box, a couple of questions came up during your presentation. The first one was, do you know if there have been any attacks on data stored on the Google Workspace or on Google Workspace?
There are many attacks on various social media and various attacks on various online services. So the advantage of dealing with a reputable service provider in providing online services is that they're generally very diligent about these attacks, and they're usually, frankly speaking, more diligent than a small not-for-profit organization in keeping their software up to date and monitoring the threat environment. So that is one approach that some organizations take, is to look at having data secured by an online service provider. What you should do, though, is understand the terms of the agreement, because you'll see that many of those agreements take very little responsibility. So, and none of the online service providers are immune from attack. They can also be vulnerable, and they're in a constant battle of trying to keep ahead of the criminals. So it's important for you to understand what the online organization can do with your data and the extent to which they will be responsible if something goes wrong.
Right. I'm going to put into the chat box a link that might be helpful for folks. It's the Nonprofit Guide to Vetting a Managed IT Service Provider, 12 Questions to Evaluate Service Quality and Fit. Now, this is a document from a US-based organization called Community IT Innovators. They're a nonprofit that works with nonprofits in the United States. So just, it's something that may be helpful. Just want to remind folks, if you have a question that you'd like to ask verbally, you can put a 1 into the chat box, and then we will unmute you so you can ask your question. Another question that came through, Martin, was, is having your information in the cloud, like Google, is that another option? That way the information isn't on your computer.
All you've done is move it from one computer to another computer. So the issue is, as I said in the previous question, you need to understand what steps the online service provider is taking to protect the information. And whether it's Google or Apple or any number of other service providers, they generally tend to be very diligent because it's their business. And they're very aware of the threat environment. So that is an option for organizations, but it's important to understand what's happening with that information, the extent to which the organization is responsible for it, whether you'll be notified if an incident does occur, because you may have notification obligations. And so in order for some organizations that are subject to those kinds of obligations, you need to know if your information has been compromised.
Thank you. Martin, you mentioned the need to seek adequate insurance. Given the rising costs of cyber attacks, including ransomware and liability costs, insurance coverage that is adequate may be hard to find. Could you comment, and are you able to offer any advice on this topic?
The insurance coverage is continuing to evolve quite quickly, and the insurance companies have excluded many forms of cyber liability from your general comprehensive general liability policies or your D&O policies. And so you have to get specific specific coverage for different types of risks. And there are a variety, and it depends on the nature of the organization. You can get coverage, and yes, there's a cost to the coverage. And typically organizations that go through some due diligence with the insurance company can get better costs. So if you have an incident response plan, if you have a a backup and recovery system, if you have cyber policies in place, if you practice an incident response plan, if you have a reputable IT service provider, any of those kinds of factors can reduce the cost of insurance. And your insurance agent can often be a conduit for very good information for you on what are good practices, because the insurance companies see virtually all of these attacks. So they have good checklists that they use when they're trying to assess what the risk is and therefore cost is to give you insurance. If you can get your hand on one of those checklists, it's a good way to see what a lot of good practices are.
Yes, and in fact, some of the literature that I've been reading recently has said that some insurance providers, in order to provide the cyber insurance, cyber liability insurance, for example, they may have prerequisites that a nonprofit or an organization has to put in some of those mitigation things like policies, like you're saying, or having an incident response plan. So there's a good reason for a nonprofit to invest in the time and effort to put together some of these protections for itself, because it may help reduce the cost of insurance, as you were saying. And again, insurance broker or your insurance provider would be a good place to start with that and see if you can get those checklists. So thank you. Martin, another question has come up in the chat box. I don't know if it's too specific, but the question is, does Dropbox, so Dropbox has a rewind feature, does that help with getting back files? Again, this may be too specific. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Dropbox.
There are a number of different techniques that you can use to try to recover files. The problem is you need ideally non-connected backup files that are secured off your system. And those are ideally the files that you want to be able to try to recover from, so that you can reconstruct your system from the last time that you had backups in place, and then try to put in place all the transactions that occurred in the interim. And I'm just not familiar with this feature, but if you can recover files from another source, then you just have to make sure that your malware isn't going to interfere with those files when you bring it back into your system.
All right. Thank you, Martin. Another question would be, what would you say is a high priority, highest priority, or a high priority for a small volunteer-run nonprofit that has no paid staff and a limited budget to do in terms of, cybersecurity? What would be the highest priority steps would you maybe recommend to a very small nonprofit like that?
Not to do their IT system by themselves, but rather to find a reputable organization to be able to provide them security and guidance on how to keep their systems secure. And I think they also have to take the responsibility of recognizing that as they collect information on donors and their clients, that they have a responsibility to keep that safe and secure. And so take some real steps. Don't be casual about it. Take some steps so that you're protecting the reputation of the organization, and thereby also your donors and your clients as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the things that you mentioned in your presentation, Martin, is that a nonprofit board, for example, could, by first determining what data the organization is collecting, making sure that is done so that the organization knows exactly what kind of data it's collecting and where it's being stored. And once you do that, then you can take concrete steps to protect that data. So, for example, if a nonprofit is collecting data on its clients and its staff, as you'd have to have for your paid staff, any personal information, you're keeping it on an online database. you need to make sure that you're protecting that database. And once you know where the information is and where it's being stored, it's easier. So that's a very concrete step that an organization can take.
Absolutely. And I would just add, when you go through the exercise of looking at the data that you're collecting, you can also look at the data that you're collecting that you don't need.
Yes.
You stop doing that, because the more data that you collect, it bogs you down and makes you more vulnerable that something's going to go wrong.
Right. And if you're not collecting it, you don't have to protect it.
Exactly.
Yeah. One other thing that I wanted to mention, you talked about the importance of training staff and volunteers in your nonprofit on how to be safe in their digital workspace and in their online behaviors. I've also heard that this is one of the best investments that a nonprofit can make. Do you have any thoughts, any more thoughts on that?
Yes. If you're looking for resources, there are many computer security professional groups working in Alberta. ISC Squared is the world's leading computer security certification service that will certify computer security professionals. They have chapters that meet in Edmonton and Calgary. ISACA is another group that will often have workshops, and these are often free to attend, or lunch and learn types of sessions. And so you can get access to a lot of useful information by doing that. I know that Concordia University of Edmonton does a series of generally monthly cybersecurity workshops, and you could approach them to see if you could subscribe to those.
Oh, okay.
So there are many sources of information that are available, and anybody who's interested can find a way to get up to speed.
Okay. Could I just, you said ISC, like squared?
Yes,
and
it's brackets. The formal name is International Information System Security Certification Consortium. And so the name is 2 I's, 2 S's, and 2 C's. So they put it ISC in brackets and a superscript 2 next to the name.
Oh, okay. All right, that's great. And so, and Concordia University of Edmonton has monthly workshops on cybersecurity that folks could, just check the website and see if they can attend some of those. That would be excellent. Okay. Well, I see we're rapidly coming to a close here, but I'd just like to very quickly go through our. Just want to say thank you very much for everyone to attend today's session. You can see the slide here, a list of our other upcoming webinars this season, and you can check them out on our Eventbrite page through the link in the chat box. Please remember that we do have our cybersecurity, What's the Board's Role webinar taking place on February 15th from 1:30 to 3:30 p.m. If you'd like to learn more about the board's role related to cybersecurity for your nonprofit. This webinar is geared at a basic or introductory level, and it is free of charge, and you can register through the Eventbrite link listed on the slide, and we'll also put that into the chat box. Today's presentation is part of our nonprofit bistro series. Here is a list of some others that are taking place during the month of February and into March, if any of those are of interest to you. And please be sure to subscribe to be notified of any of our new recordings as they become available, because we've recorded today's session. It will be posted to YouTube in the coming days. And so you can watch it again if you're interested. If you have any questions or need further information, or if you'd like to request the services of the Community Development Unit, you can contact us at any of the following ways. We have a YouTube channel, we have a consultation line where you can speak to one of our community development officers directly, our email, and our website, and our registration, webinar registration on Eventbrite. And all of this information is available in your toolkit as well. So I don't see any more questions in the chat box, Martin, but I'd just like to say thank you again for bringing your expertise and your experience with dealing with ransomware attacks. This has been very, very informative and very interesting. And so on behalf of the Community Development Unit and all the participants, thank you. And thank you to everyone for attending today.
Thank you all as well.